On a quiet morning in May 2020, emergency lines in a small Connecticut town lit up with panic. Callers described something almost unreal. An attack in the middle of the road. A man on a motorcycle, blood everywhere, victims barely recognizable. At first, people thought it was a hit and run, or maybe a fight that went too far. It wasn't. What unfolded over the next 5 days would become one of the most disturbing crime sprees in recent memory. And at the center of it all was a college student no one expected. The first attack. The neighborhood was calm that morning until a stranger showed up asking for help. The attacker, later identified as 23-year-old Peter Manfredonia, approached a local man named Ted. He claimed his motorcycle had broken down and needed assistance. Ted agreed to help. It seemed like a normal act of kindness, the kind people don't think twice about. But moments later, that decision turned into a nightmare. Witnesses later described seeing Ted running for his life, chased by Peter, who was now armed with a long blade. The attack was sudden, brutal, and relentless. Another neighbor, an elderly man, came outside after hearing the commotion. He tried to intervene, but was also violently attacked. Within minutes, the street was filled with screams, confusion, and horror. Ted suffered devastating injuries and would not survive. The attacker? Gone. A violent escape. Peter fled the scene on a motorcycle, disappearing before police could arrive. At that point, authorities didn't know who he was. Just a vague description: young, armed, and extremely dangerous. But then, a break. A motorcycle matching the description was found abandoned in the woods just a few miles away. That's when police identified the suspect, a university student, no criminal history, known to be quiet, even athletic. But behind that image, something wasn't right. Reports soon surfaced that Peter had been struggling mentally. Mood swings, isolation, instability. Still, nothing that hinted at this level of violence. And what police didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning. A house of terror. Days later, officers tracked new leads to a nearby home. When they entered, they expected to find the suspect. Instead, they found a victim. A 73-year-old man had been tied up and held captive inside his own house. He told police that Peter had broken in, restrained him, and stayed there for nearly a full day. Sleeping, moving around, acting unpredictably. At one point, he reportedly held a gun to the man's head. Then suddenly, he was gone again, but not empty-handed. He had taken the man's truck, weapons, and cash, and disappeared for a second time. At this point, the situation had escalated from violent assault to full-blown manhunt, the second killing. Not long after, another emergency call came in. This one was different, more urgent, more chaotic. A father called 911, barely able to speak.
Yes! 911.
Yes! If I need an ambulance here, I need everything, state police, everything. The Peter Manfredonia stabbed my son!
Where are you? What town are you in?
I'm in Derby! You gotta get here! Yes, just get here now!
Sir, what is going on there?
My son has been stabbed! I got a child here, I can't tell you!
His son had been attacked. When police arrived, they discovered the worst. The victim, a young man named Nick, was dead. He had been shot inside his own home. But what made this even more disturbing was who was missing. Nick's girlfriend, Shannon, was gone, and all signs pointed to Peter. Kidnapped and forced to flee, Shannon had been taken at gunpoint. According to her later statements, she woke up to an argument between Peter and her boyfriend. Moments later, gunshots rang out. Peter then forced her to get into a car and drive. What followed was a terrifying journey across state lines. He controlled everything: where they went, how fast she drove, even where she looked. At one point, she tried to attract attention by driving erratically, but nothing worked. She was completely under his control. But then, something changed. After hours on the road, Shannon convinced him she couldn't continue driving. That's when they stopped at a truck stop. Peter ordered an Uber, and somehow, that moment became her escape, still on the run. Even after releasing Shannon, Peter wasn't done. Now alone again, armed and increasingly unpredictable, he continued moving. Police across multiple states were now involved. Surveillance footage, witness tips, and digital tracking slowly began to narrow his location. The manhunt intensified. Every hour he remained free was a risk, the capture. 5 days after the first attack, it finally ended. Peter was located at a gas station in Maryland. When officers approached him, something surprising happened. He didn't run. He didn't resist. He simply gave up. After days of violence, fear, and chaos, it ended quietly. The interrogation. In custody, investigators tried to understand what had happened. Why did this happen? What triggered it? Peter's answers were vague. He spoke about not sleeping for days. He mentioned being in a manic state. He admitted to struggling mentally for a long time. But when it came to the crimes themselves, he shut down, refusing to explain, avoiding details, leaving investigators and everyone else with more questions than answers. The outcome. Eventually, Peter Manfredonia pleaded guilty. The charges were severe: murder, assault, kidnapping, home invasion. He was sentenced to decades in prison, a life essentially spent behind bars. The unanswered question. But even with a conviction, one thing remains unclear. Why? What causes someone to snap so violently, so suddenly? Was it mental illness? Personal issues? Something deeper? No clear answer has ever been confirmed. What began as a simple request for help turned into a chain of violence that shocked an entire region. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous stories are the ones no one sees coming.